This is the Raptor Dash panel that I'm going to fit into my 1993 Defender 110. Raptor Engineering are from Sheffield in the United Kingdom. They produce a variety of modifications and upgrades, including a pod that fits on the top. That was a modification I decided not to have because I don't like things obscuring the view through the front window. The dash itself fits here in the centre between the two ventilation levers, but it does require a cut in the bottom of the dash here, for which we have a template. The template is drawn onto a sheet of paper that comes with your dashboard, and quite disconcertingly there's a line of text here that warns about uneven and unneat cuts. It says that should your cut be unneat, they do supply a trim that will neaten up your bodgy mess. Now, I didn't know about this, and given that it takes about 7 days to order these parts from the United Kingdom, I'm in Australia, I'm going to have to try and cut the panel out as neat as possible. So let's crack on. The first job for me is removing my ICOM UHF radio. Now that the radio has been removed, my next job is removing this centre panel that contains my clock, a cigarette lighter 12 volt output and the rear wash wiper. Now your panel might be slightly different. Mine, that I realised after I took it off, has actually been modified, is not standard. Somebody's installed a clock and done a little bit of butchery to the metal panel behind. Removing this panel was straightforward, flathead screwdriver and a captive nut behind that I was able to hold with my fingers. Now what I'm doing here is taking a photograph of the wires because I've discovered the hard way that my memory just isn't what it used to be. So a few quick snaps using the trusty iPhone, and that'll help me identify what each of these wires are at a later date. Securing the knowledge that my iPhone contained all the memories I needed, I then removed the wires from the back of the panels. These are located with spade type connectors, and I used a pair of trusty snipe nose pliers to help me remove each of the cables from the back. Once removed, I did a little bit of tidying of the wires. There was quite a nest of wiring, lots of modifications and add-ons and wires for a radio. I notice at this point also that this wire, which is a permanent 12 volt, is naked. There's nothing there at all to protect that from shorting out against an earth. And here, floating around in the back, is a perfect earth, a discarded aerial lead. So altogether, that was a recipe for disaster. So I did something that I should have done at the beginning, and was isolate my battery using the battery isolator. If you don't have one yourself, I would recommend getting one. Otherwise, disconnect the terminals from your battery, which you normally find under your passenger seat. Being the moocher I am, I was quite excited to find lots of bits and pieces hidden away in the dashboard that had probably been discarded at some stage in the past. This was a broken part to the old gear knob that I replaced last week. It looked like it was homemade. And as we cleaned up further, even more bits and pieces were found. No idea what this was. And again, as we went along, I took a few more photographs to help document where all the wires had come from. Now, once all the wires were tidied away, I decided to glue the paper template over some cardboard. The holes were appropriately marked, which allows me to fasten these to the screws on the front of the dash panel and to locate the template in the correct position. Once we fastened the template to the dashboard, we could see exactly where the cuts need to be made. There's no cuts needed here on the top. The top of the template just follows the contour of the dashboard, so we don't need to make any cuts there at all. Now at the bottom, we'll find out later on that the cut on the bottom is also less important, because if this is raggedy, it's actually covered by the Raptor Dash. But the sides, however, these are the important cut. These need to be neat, and they need to be done precisely. I need to mention at this point that my Defender has the underdash air conditioning unit. This is tropical Queensland, and without that the wife tends to get a little bit grumpy. It is a slightly different Raptor Dash panel to go with the air conditioning, so make sure you order the right panel that fits your car. With the template in place, using a pencil, I mark the vertical lines where I'm going to cut. Now these are an important cut, and I almost made a mistake. Now the old adage goes, measure twice, cut once, and it turned out, due to the thickness of the pencil and perhaps some of the ragged edges of the template, these lines were actually slightly too wide, meaning the hole would have been too big. So a bit of diligent measuring helped ensure that the cuts were in the right place. So here I am measuring the exact width of the Raptor Dash panel and comparing it to the lines that are actually drawn on the dashboard. And I was able to calculate just how wide these lines were, and I adjusted them accordingly. Now every man loves to use power tools, and the power tool of choice this time was a grinder. In retrospect, I feel the grinder was probably the wrong tool. It would have been better using a multi-tool or even a hacksaw. The grinder was quick, but it had a tendency to snag on the thin metal plate of the dashboard and to grab and to run off. Now a hacksaw takes a lot longer, but you're probably going to get a neater job. With a little bit of trial and error, I discovered that using the Stanley knife was a better way of cutting through the front part of the dashboard, and using the power tools just for cutting the steel plate behind. So here we are with everything cut out. I am just making sure there's no burrs and everything's smooth and clean. You can see here to the right, perhaps you can't, but there's a slight scotch mark where the grinder had gripped and ran across the fascia of the dashboard. I was gutted at the time, but in actual fact, once the Raptor Dash assembly was fitted, you can't see this at all. So it was an error that could have been disastrous, but didn't turn out too bad in the long run. Once the front of the dash had been cut away, I was able to find even more debris that had been buried at the back. Do you remember these? They call them cigarettes, and it seems that there was quite a stash of them behind the wires here. Perhaps they'd been hiding them away from the wife. Once cut out, I did a test install of the Raptor Dash assembly, and I was amazed to find out just how snug, how tight and how clean this assembly fitted. I decided to drive in a little self-tapper just to hold it in place while I checked everything fitted properly. It turns out I was very happy indeed with the way things fitted, so time to fit things in permanently. I drilled 2 holes through into the bulkhead so that I could fit nuts and bolts to fasten the Raptor Dash in securely. The nuts that I decided to use were nylock nuts, so they didn't rattle loose, Defenders being Defenders, and luckily you're able to access behind the bulkhead to fasten the nuts on from the ashtray. Just remove the ashtray as I have above, and you've got good access, although slightly fiddly, to be able to fit your nuts to any bolts that you insert from below. The final tighten with a crosshead screwdriver and a ring spanner, and the Raptor Dash is as solid as a rock. Now there's enough room behind this dash panel for me to fit my ICOM CB. The controls for the CB are on the microphone, so this can be hidden out of the way and out of the prying eye of Queensland thieves. Once the CB was securely fastened into place, I decided to use a chocolate block connector to try and organise my wiring. Now, I wouldn't recommend the use of a chocolate block connector for permanent wiring. This is here now purely to help me organise things, and will be removed at a later date, and proper connections with heat shrink sleeving are going to be used. The problem with connector blocks is that they move around in a moving vehicle and you get metal fatigue of the wires, and eventually these will break off. So not recommended, but for a temporary fix until I know exactly what I'm doing with my wiring, this will do for now. So out comes the test meter. Now this is an invaluable piece of equipment for any modification involving your wiring. The first job for this test meter was just to check to see whether I'd got a good ground from the Raptor Dash panel. Remember, it is screwed into the bulkhead, so it should give me a good ground, and indeed it did. So now I can rest assured that any of the switches that ground to the front plate will in themselves have a good ground without the need for additional ground wires, or indeed as a backup should any of them fail. So we're almost finished now. I'm just looking at the copious amount of wire that goes to my CB. Having coiled up wires in the back of your dashboard like this is not advised. Coiled wires create resistance and extra power drain. So I'm just going to tidy these up, shorten them, and we can get the Raptor Dash faceplate screwed up into position. So after a quick test of all the switches and the power outlets, the bottom faceplate is fastened up to the Raptor assembly using 10 Allen screws. Each of these screws and the Allen key is provided by Raptor. So here we are fastening it up. You'll see I've got a nice hole there at the front ready to fasten in my Alpine radio, which is currently wrapped up under the Christmas tree. It's a present from my wife, but she's affectionately labelled it "To Shaun from Shaun." So there's something to be said about choosing your own Christmas present. So here we are. The Raptor is installed. 3 holes at the top, 4 gauges, hole at the bottom for the radio, and the microphone, which is going to be fastened on a bracket here, is just being hung in the radio hole for the time being. Now this is the faceplate arrangement that I chose to suit my needs. There's a multitude of different faceplates that you can order directly from Raptor, and you can even choose to have custom holes drilled out for your own personal requirements if you need them. So my switches from the top left would be the ARB air compressor, and then would be the rear and then the front locker. The 2 top right switches are for the front and the rear winch, and then I've got a set of switches here at the bottom just for auxiliaries like spotlights, fridge and such like. I think altogether it looks the mutts nuts. I don't know what you think. I'm looking forward to installing the radio and looking forward to buying myself a few rather nice looking gauges. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Please feel free to subscribe to the Misadventurers Journal, and I hope to see you soon with some new videos. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.